Hi, my name's Daniel Kitts. I'm the online editor of The Agenda with Steve Paikin, and this Thursday we're thrilled to have Nik Nanos, president of Nanos Research, as part of our Agenda Election Night broadcast. Mr. Nanos, thanks very much for joining us.
It's great to be with you.
It'll be great to have you with Steve Paikin on election night analyzing the results. Let me ask you, it's been in many people's minds a kind of an unpredictable and crazy campaign in terms of polling. What's your take on where the campaigns are in terms of their relative popularity with the electorate?
Well, it's been a bit of a roller coaster ride, really. When you think about the beginning of the campaign, all the polls showed basically that the Liberals had the upper hand, which probably explains why, Premier Wynne wasn't very upset when Andrea Horwath pulled the trigger on the election. It's obvious that the Liberals were ready. They had a marginal advantage, not necessarily a majority territory, and they were probably ready to what I'll say, fight an election based on the budget that was defeated. But fast forward you could see the first part of the campaign, surprisingly, was about Tim Hudak and his million jobs pledge to create 1 million jobs and his 100,000 cuts to the public service. And it's a bit ironic. Usually our elections are about incumbents, how people feel about the government of the day that's trying to hold on to power. I think it would be fair to say that the first part of the election was about Tim Hudak and his promises, whether they added up or not. And from a polling perspective, we've seen the numbers kind of bounce around a bit. But the one thing that all of the pollsters agree on is that the New Democrats are not doing as well as they have been prior to the election or compared to the last provincial election. So the key takeaway right now from a research perspective is that the New Democrats are down and that this election has distilled itself to a key battle between Wynne and Hudak.
One follow-up question to that. I'm not sure if you have the answer to this, but it seems like Kathleen Wynne is trying to make the election about Tim Hudak's economic plan, whereas the opposition parties are trying to make the ballot issue more the issues of liberal scandal. And I'm just curious if there's anything in the polling that's showing which narrative is being more closely followed or believed by the broader public.
Well, I think when we look at the polling numbers, it's pretty clear that, while the focus was on Tim Hudak, that was actually good news for the Wynne Liberals. But what we have seen in many of the polls that are out there is that post-debate, and what I'll say, the attacks, the direct frontal attacks on Kathleen Wynne from both Horwath and Hudak on the gas plant issue specifically, that those have kind of shifted a bit of the momentum to Tim Hudak. And right now we're in a situation where I think it would hazard to say that this election is more about the gas plant controversy and the Liberals than it is about Tim Hudak. And so the debate was a key pivot point for a lot of Ontarians because they tuned into the election, and then what did they see? Attacks on Premier Wynne and her apologizing and trying to defend what I'll say the gas plants scandal.
Now, the parties also do their own polling. Of course, they don't release their polls to the public, but obviously they have their own sense of how the race is going, and the only way we can really tell what their polls are saying is how they're behaving in terms of which ridings they're visiting, the types of messages they're putting out. Is there anything on what the party tactics this week tell you about where they feel they are in terms of the polls?
Yeah, actually, that's a very good point. Actually, when you're looking at Tim Hudak and Kathleen Wynne, they're actually visiting the same ridings, which speaks to the swing ridings that are out there. So ridings in suburban ridings in the GTA, such as Etobicoke Lakeshore ridings like that. In Ottawa, ridings such as Ottawa Orleans and Ottawa West Nepean are key battlegrounds. It's almost like Wynne and Hudak are following each other around the province. Those are the best indicators of the ridings to watch because it's clear that those ridings are in play. It's quite possible, depending on the voter turnout and what happens in the close of the campaign, that we may have another minority government, perhaps another liberal minority government, or perhaps a conservative minority government. And if that's the case, it'll be a handful of ridings that will really determine the outcome in terms of who will be the premier the day after the election. The other thing that's important are the attack ads, right? When the attack ads really tell us what the polling shows. So we've seen attack ads from the Liberals focusing on Tim Hudak's promises related to jobs, alleging that they don't add up. So obviously the Liberals have done polling saying, you know what, this is a sweet spot to attack the Conservatives, and the Conservatives have been running hard in terms of what I'll say the gas plant scandal, and not, and, the fact that from their perspective, the Liberals should not be trusted. So it's going to be like it's a bit of an election where, do you want a flawed government or flawed math? Choose your poison if you're an Ontario voter.
Mhm. And of course, Andrea Horwath, the NDP leader, is saying you don't have to choose either. You can choose me and get neither of those. Of course, right now, it seems the polls indicate that the voters aren't necessarily buying her pitch.
Yeah.
But
You know what? To
yeah.
that point about Andrea Horwath, what's interesting is that her polling over the last number of years, her personal polling has actually been pretty good, right? I think it would be fair to say that it's not just, you're right when it says that she's not connecting, but it's not. We have to remember that a lot of voters have built up goodwill towards the New Democrats. They like Andrea Horwath, but she is politically being squeezed as Ontarians are trying to decide whether they're ready for change, significant change in terms of Tim Hudak, or whether they're afraid of that potential change. And what to watch out for are those strategic voters. We've seen strategic voting in the past in Ontario, whether those New Democrats stay loyal to Andrea Horwath or whether they decide to park with the Liberals in order to potentially block Tim Hudak.
So you'll be watching those strategic voters, those swing voters.
Exactly, and we'll have to see. We have to realize that in the last election was a bit of a perfect storm for the New Democrats. Jack Layton had just passed away. There was a lot of goodwill towards what I'll say social democratic and progressive values. She had run a very good campaign. It was actually quite positive. Like, this is like Andrea Horwath, version 2.0, because in the last campaign she was not as negative and hard-hitting as she is in this campaign. So it's just, I think a lot of it is going to have to do with how much will she get squeezed just because of the circumstances of what I'll say the current political environment between the Liberals and the Conservatives.
Very interesting stuff. Well, we look forward to seeing and hearing more of your analysis on our broadcast all election night here at the Agenda on TVO. Nik Nanos, President of Nanos Research, thanks again so much for taking part in this and joining us today.
We'll see you on election night.